The Whitmore estate sat along the Connecticut coastline like a monument to reputation, white columns, trimmed hedges, and a silence that demanded obedience. Inside, Eleanor Whitmore moved through rooms as if she were a shadow, present but rarely acknowledged. At 28, she had long accepted her role in the family, the sensible daughter, the useful one, the one who stood behind her younger sister when introductions were made. Vivian was beauty refined into a promise, bright smile, flawless posture, trained laughter. Their father had invested in her the way other men invested in stocks, confident she would yield the greatest return. The arrival of Duke Alexander Hale turned the house restless. Though Duke was an inherited family title rather than nobility, it carried weight in American high society. He was a Boston-based industrialist, respected for rebuilding companies others had abandoned. To the Whitmores, he was not a guest, but an opportunity. At dinner, crystal glasses caught the light as conversation stayed polite and hollow. Mr. Whitmore leaned slightly toward Alexander, his voice low, practiced. "Take the pretty one," he said with a smile that assumed agreement. His glance landing briefly on Vivian. Eleanor kept her eyes lowered, her fork steady despite the familiar sting. She had heard variations of that sentence her entire life. Alexander said nothing then, but he observed everything. He noticed Eleanor's restraint, how she spoke only when addressed, and how her words carried thought rather than decoration. He noticed how she anticipated needs, refilling water, adjusting seating, without seeking praise. When Vivian laughed, it filled the room. When Eleanor smiled, it felt private, almost careful. After dinner, the house dispersed into small performances of charm. Eleanor retreated to the library, a quiet refuge where she reorganized shelves that no one else touched. She did not expect company. When Alexander appeared in the doorway, she stiffened, ready to excuse herself. Instead, he asked about the books, real questions. She answered honestly, and the conversation unfolded naturally about economics, social responsibility, and the burden of inherited power. For the first time, Eleanor was not being assessed. She was being understood. The next morning, sunlight poured into the sitting room as the family gathered. Mr. Whitmore stood confidently, certain of the outcome. Alexander's voice was calm when he spoke. "I've made my decision," he said, eyes steady. "I choose Eleanor." The room froze. Vivian's smile collapsed into shock. Mr. Whitmore laughed once, sharp and disbelieving. Eleanor felt the floor tilt beneath her, a lifetime of dismissal clashing with a single, unexpected choice. Alexander did not explain himself. He didn't need to. In that moment, Eleanor realized this was not about rejection or defiance. It was about recognition, and everything in her life was about to change. The silence that followed his words felt heavier than any argument. Mr. Whitmore's expression hardened, confidence giving way to disbelief, and then quiet fury. He spoke of appearances, of expectations, of how such a decision would be perceived in society. Vivian sat rigid, her shock quickly turning into wounded pride, as if something meant for her had been stolen. Eleanor remained still, afraid that any movement might shatter the moment, as though this choice could be taken back if questioned too closely. Alexander listened without interruption. When Mr. Whitmore finally finished, he replied calmly, almost gently. He said he wasn't seeking a decoration for his life, but a partner who understood responsibility, discipline, and purpose. His gaze never left Eleanor as he spoke. That steady certainty gave her the courage to lift her head, to meet her father's eyes without apology for the first time. The engagement was announced with polite formality, but the warmth in the Whitmore house faded instantly. Whispers followed Eleanor through the halls, some filled with envy, others with disbelief. She was accused, silently and aloud, of ambition, of manipulation, of being chosen out of pity. None of it mattered as much as the quiet respect Alexander showed her every day, asking her thoughts, valuing her judgment, and never once treating her as an exception. They married away from Connecticut, choosing a small ceremony on the Massachusetts coast where the Atlantic stretched, wide and unbothered by opinion. In Boston, Eleanor stepped into a life that demanded competence rather than charm. She learned quickly, not because she was taught, but because she had always been prepared. She reviewed financial reports, challenged long-standing advisors, and reshaped charitable initiatives that had existed more for prestige than impact. Public curiosity turned into cautious admiration. Eleanor never sought attention, but her work spoke clearly. Alexander, accustomed to command, found in her an equal who strengthened decisions rather than softened them. Together, they built something durable, not glamorous, but respected. Years later, when Eleanor returned briefly to the Whitmore estate, she did so without bitterness. The house felt smaller, its authority diminished. Her father spoke less, his certainty worn thin by time. Vivian's life, though comfortable, carried an edge of restlessness Eleanor no longer recognized in herself. As Eleanor walked away, Alexander waiting patiently outside, she understood the truth that had reshaped her fate. She had not been chosen because her sister was rejected. She had been chosen because someone finally saw her clearly, and she had learned to see herself the same way.